Hello there and welcome to the Get French Football News Preview Show. I'm Nathan Staples and joining me this evening are Adam White and Samuel Rooke. Ligue has got a little needy after the winter break, giving us a midweek treat some of us weren't quite ready for. But a look at the games that we had over Tuesday and Wednesday and the ones ahead after the latest headlines. Bordeaux sank back to their recent form at least as they were beaten 2-0 at home to Caen. Newman Paul Bice saw red before Ivan Santini and Ronnie Rodelin netted for the Normandy club, with the Brazilian players for Les Girondins, including Malcolm, facing disciplinary action by the club after seemingly joking and laughing in an online video after the game. Also in Bordeaux news, Jocelyn Gourvenec has lost his job today. They have provisionally suspended him in the lieu of sacking him. And also club captain Jeremy Toulon has been released 4 months early of the end of his contract. Rumours that he might have been upset with the Brazilian players. Elsewhere on Tuesday, Marseille rose to third as Dimitri Payet netted a superb goal in their 2-0 win over Strasbourg as Alexandre Okuja needed to be stretched off after the Frenchman's dazzling footwork. And in the second Côte d'Azur derby in just over a week, Monaco left it late to earn a point against Nice. The away side came from a goal behind to make it 2-1 before Falcao snuck in to even things up. But there were just some more good news, at least for Lucien Favre's men, as Willian Cyprien made his first start since March. On Wednesday, Lyon rose to second with a 2-0 win over Guingamp as Nabil Fekir grabbed his 15th goal of the season, while Angers needed an unlikely brace from Romain Thomas to see off Troyes 3-1. Rennes left it very late to turn it completely around in Lille with a 2-1 win, while both Amiens against Montpellier and Nantes at Toulouse finished with 1-1 draws. In the final match of the round, Paris Saint-Germain recorded their highest win at home history with a 8-0 thrashing. Neymar grabbed 4 in a fabulous display that was somewhat marred by not allowing Edinson Cavani to take the penalty that would have seen the Uruguayan stand alone as the club's record top scorer. And that's all for now. But for all the latest in the world of French football, head on over to our website at www.getfootballfrance.com and follow us on Twitter at GFFN. We start this week with that big news from Bordeaux with Gourvenec finally sacked. It seemed like for a while he was teetering on the edge, the real struggle of no wins in 10. There was that big cup loss with several red cards in it. It was surprising he didn't go then. He maybe had a small salvo with the win at the weekend, but that result against Caen has finally seen his head roll. Adam, it's a little bit sad because we all think that Gourvenec is a talented young manager, but this just feels like it was the right decision in the end, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I have to agree with those sentiments there, Nathan. I think, as with many people that watch a lot of French football, Gourvenec is well respected and did an absolutely unbelievable job with Guingamp winning the cup and getting into the knockout stage of the Europa League for such a small team. It was unbelievable. And he's 45. I think he's in his mid-40s, so he's still got a long way to go in his career. But I really feel like this reign at Bordeaux had a long time ago had kind of fallen off the rails, and it is really unfortunate. But it has to be the right decision because it just became his position became untenable. Really, for me, a little while ago, before this lost to Caen last night, the night before, he was. I was amazed he was still in a job before Christmas. Given this Bordeaux side on paper are such a talented team, and we're expected to be top 5, top 6, even challenging above that. Really, given how well they recruited and players like Malcolm kicking on this year and a number of other things, they're expected to be at the opposite end of the table, but to be struggling in a relegation fight really. We've since that PSG defeat where they lost 6-2 and a 5-0 down within sort of half an hour or so. Since then, they've just been absolutely terrible. The defense has been completely AWOL. Moving Jeremy Toulon on back to defensive midfield probably came a bit late, but they had kind of had no choice but to play in defence because they completely porous there. And Gourvenec hadn't been able to cajole his team into something that looked like a stable and competent display. They were just all over the place. So I'm not surprised he's gone. And the only thing for me that's even mildly shocking is that perhaps he didn't go sooner. I wouldn't necessarily blame him outright, as we'll get on to discuss in a minute. I think there's probably a lot of factors that went against him, and fair play to the Bordeaux, to Stéphane Martin, who's a relatively new chairman at Bordeaux, president of Bordeaux, for sticking with him and saying that it's not his fault and we need to look at other things, which I think is true as well. But because again, some of the performances from some of the players have been terrible. But as I said, it was untenable, and I'm not surprised that after that mini revival at Troyes at the weekend, you thought maybe he's got a chance. But given the performance last night, I think fair enough, and it's the best decision for all concerned, I think.
Yeah, and it's Eric Bedouet who's going to be taking temporary charge. And the current surprising favourite is former Club Brugge boss Michel Preud'homme. So that'll be an interesting appointment, a bit of a one from left field. But let's talk about that sort of disharmony. And it was briefly mentioned in the news, Sam, of obviously Jeremy Toulalan has left this evening as well. His contract ends in the summer, but he's decided to end it early. It was a mutual decision, according to the club. But there are rumours that with this video that we saw last night of the Brazilian players having a bit of a joke with a couple of female friends after the game, it's not the greatest look in the first place, but there was a reported tensions between him and those kind of players that seem to be almost taking over the dressing room in some way. And I do stress those are reports. That's not absolute facts we're saying. But those kind of things, I always think there's no smoke without fire. Does that feel like maybe that's what's led to Bordeaux's collapse?
I think there's a lot to unpick in this whole thing. I mean, we've said that since the summer, when there was very high expectations, and it just really hasn't delivered. But the video this week, the Brazilians having a laugh outside the stadium, bit silly, not the biggest deal in the world, but obviously Bordeaux didn't react very well, and Toulalan choosing to walk with the manager. The West French newspaper, they've said this is a movement that says a lot. His departure says a lot, that he's a guy of real principle, really stands by what he believes in. They've really sort of gone in on the idea that he didn't believe this was the right move for the club to sack the manager, and that the club has not stood with the right guys. And I think it all sort of comes together in that this issue with the Brazilian players, I think your comment, no smoke without fire, is probably just about right.
Yeah, it feels like this maybe has been bubbling under the surface under this sort of barren run, and we were talking about some transfer deals on Monday's show, and I do feel a little bit sorry for Rich at the moment now, thinking that he said Paul Bice sounds like an interesting signing with his Ligue and experience, but Adam, it feels like they're replacing the incredibly slow Toulalan with a potentially even slower player in Bice, and he's not got off to the greatest start because he's been sent off as well.
Yeah, he has. I would hold reserve judgment on Paul Bice just for now. I agree that the one thing that Bordeaux, you would have hoped they would have looked for in a new centre back was pace. Given that, when you look at their back line, Toulalan obviously is extremely slow, and Jovanovic isn't quick. Luzchuk's 32 and not quick either. Pablo, returning from Brazil, hasn't played yet, of course, but he's not quick either. They needed a bit more, speed at the back, and that was a bit of an obvious and simple, thing to request, but they needed it, and they didn't really get it with Paul Bice. But I think what Paul Bice at the time of the signing would have, Gourvenec would have thought that perhaps he wanted to move Toulalan back to midfield because his defense, being in defense wasn't working, and he could kind of, be a placeholder for Toulalan. He could put him back in midfield where Toulalan could have an influence. But obviously that's out the window with Gourvenec gone and Toulalan gone as well. I do think that will turn into like a relatively good signing for them, given how good he was at Nice. He's actually been okay at Malaga as well, although perhaps not. He didn't really carry his Nice form over there. But Paul Bice does have a league experience, and in this league, pace for as an individual, as long as he's got someone alongside him, which they possibly haven't found yet. But if he has a partner who can fill the gaps with their pace, then I think he'll be a very strong centre back for them. So it's not too bad of a signing, but given the mess that they've been left with now, like they look like they're completely decimated without Toulalan, without Gourvenec. I would just wanted to address the Preud'homme thing. I think that's a really interesting signing. I know he did, if they do actually sign him as manager, He was good at Bruges and is sort of renowned as a leader. And a lot of his assistants in Belgium have gone on to manage other Belgian teams. And he with him as their mentor, and that's the kind of manager Bordeaux need. They need a stabilizing presence, someone who is going to lead this club in the right direction. Because although Gourvenec is a talented young guy and a talented young manager, perhaps he hasn't had any experience of having to do that necessarily at a big club. Like, he's brilliant with Gangon, but it's a very different kettle of fish with them. And what he did there, although brilliant as it was. So perhaps if they do sign Prudhomme, who's relatively good with Twente as well as in German Holland, that could be quite a left field, yes, but quite an astute managerial signing if they do end up getting him.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one, really. They do maybe need a bit more of a authoritarian, really, if the youngsters are running a little bit wild at the moment, at least. Anyway. Let's talk about the big result, really, of this midweek round of fixtures, and it is that Paris Saint-Germain win, Sam. It was a superb game for the hosts. From minute 1 to minute 90, they were really on top of a Dijon side that it always felt like they might be like that against a big team, that they might be a bit too gung-ho, and it proved to be. And it was, start with the positives at least. I said, well, I felt like during this game, this felt like Neymar's kind of Messi-esque performance. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. 4 goals and 2 assists. One of those assists could have just about almost been a goal if Di Maria hadn't nipped in there. Just astonishing. I mean, the third goal before the penalty, the weaving run from the sideline on halfway, just cutting through practically the entire Dijon defense and midfield. It was just absurd. That was, I think, what PSG fans were dreaming of when this signing first was rumored. It was performances like that. It was absolutely astonishing. Just tear teams apart, untouchable, unstoppable. A free kick, a penalty, everything you could ask for from Neymar, right up until the penalty when there was that little bit of drama.
A little bit of drama, it seems, again. For those who haven't already seen it, I mean, they're already, it was 5-0 by the time of the penalty, wasn't it? Or was it 6? I can't quite remember. There was a lot of goals last night, but that's all that matters. It was enough to say that Neymar has already bagged his hat trick. He grabs the ball. Everyone's chanting Cavani's name because he's scored earlier this night that puts him level on those 155 goals as Zlatan Ibrahimovic. The perfect opportunity to cap off a performance and give him the record. They're chanting his name. Neymar seems completely unfazed, takes the ball and scores the penalty himself. Adam, he's got a lot of criticism for it, which is a little unsurprising because it was a perfect moment for him to sort of extend the olive branch to Cavani. But at the same time, is this, like I compared him slightly to Messi earlier, is this maybe the Ronaldo in him, this is now his team, therefore people need to know it's his team?
Yeah, I think that's a good point and a good way to think about it. I also, my initial reaction, and obviously there are a lot of caveats to this, I kind of almost felt like it was for the number of goals, because I feel like if he's going to compete, which I still believe that is his main objective, to compete with Messi and Ronaldo, not just in terms of stature and in terms of winning trophies and winning the Ballon d'Or, but in terms of, we talk about these ridiculous stats that Messi and Ronaldo have in terms of goals per game and numbers of goals in years and seasons. But I almost think that he wants to take every opportunity to sort of compete, and I almost felt like it felt a bit like that, like he wanted more and more goals. Excuse me, but he did let him take a free kick at one point. I can't remember if that was after or before the penalty decision, but so maybe there was a little bit of remorse there. But I think it is turning into. Eric made an interesting point today. Eric Devin of this parish, he and I write our weekly piece for the Guardian. He was saying that it's a little bit about him, and he is the project rather than the team, and it does kind of feel like he said, PSG are now my team, like Messi's Barcelona and Messi's team, and Real Madrid are Ronaldo's team. This is now my kingdom, and this is my situation, and that it did smack of that a little bit. But I would like to think that despite that rather unfortunate ending to the game, it was actually the 8th goal. Looking at it now, the last goal they scored, that we should do our best to celebrate how good Neymar was last night, and that he plays in Ligue, and that he is an unbelievably talented footballer and was genuinely fantastic last night. Not just in the way that he was against Toulouse, which he was very good at the beginning of his PSG spell, and the way he has in a couple of games, but he was on another level entirely last night. He was absolutely outstanding. So although there is criticism, and just criticism, of course, for him not giving that penalty to Cavani, and I'm still surprised that he didn't, to be honest, but I still think we should try and focus on the fact, as well as that he is an unbelievably talented footballer. He plays in France, which is fantastic.
Yeah, and it's a strange one, really, isn't it? I mean, Neymar was absolutely superb. And I also feel that on these kind of scenarios, and similar to when other players have tried to pick the ball off others, maybe at the moment, at least anyway, Neymar's the designated penalty taker, which it seemed like because he grabbed the ball straight away. No one's really had an argument with him to give the ball away. Maybe that's just the instruction from the management that the designated penalty taker takes the penalties. But it'd have been nice, at least anyway, for Neymar to think of others for once. But the chance will be a fine thing, won't it? Unfortunately, let's move on to teams below them, at least now, or just below them, and an important result for Nice, but not a great one again for Monaco. They've sort of slowly crept out of the winter break at the moment, and they got really lucky in the end on this one. Sam, even the goal was a little bit lucky because they take a quick free kick, although well within the rules. It surprises Nice. They were a little bit unfortunate with the first goal as well. It's possibly even taken two handballs and then gone into the net. And they were really, really poor in the second half and allowed Nice to get back into it and really take a stranglehold on this. They were really lucky to come out with a draw in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the handballs you mentioned for the first goal, after the quick free kick, the goalkeeper spilled it for Falcao to put away the equaliser. They looked very, very poor, surprisingly poor, and they've not dropped a lot of points recently, but just coming out of the international break with these two draws now, Montpellier away, yes, fine, that's maybe a tricky game. This one, I suppose, as well, Nice, Derby, but back-to-back, dropping these important points while the teams around them are winning, dropping from second now to fourth. That's a big deal. I mean, they're now out of the Champions League places as it stands, and that's just not really something that the project perhaps can sustain. If they don't finish in the Champions League, they don't attract the right quality of players, perhaps some of these other younger players they've brought in to develop over the longer-term players like Tielemans, perhaps they look elsewhere. It's a real problem, and it comes from some surprisingly poor performances like last night.
Yeah, and it's a worrying trend for them, really. Adam, and Sam mentioned it perfectly there, that they've dropped now to fourth. They're a point behind Marseille, two behind Lyon, who do face PSG at the weekend. So there's maybe a chance of something, you might say, at least for Monaco to maybe play a bit of catch-up. But a worrying trend again of they were in front in this one quite early on, and they looked okay for the first sort of 20 minutes, but Nice didn't really have to pull themselves out of third gear, really, in the second half to really manipulate them. And in another day, there's a chance for Willian Cyprien when he goes through, and he's maybe a little bit unfortunate. It could have really been pretty ugly, really, in the end.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. But I think there are a couple of caveats there. Firstly, Nice have really improved of late, and after that really terrible start, really slow start, Lucien Favre's really got them playing again. And I think they won't be necessarily challenging for a top four spot, but I think they'll overtake Nantes quite comfortably by the end of the season, and they'll be causing the top four issues when they play them between now and the end of the year. And they do look like they've got their act together finally. So there is a lot to be said for their form. And you have to remember that last season, and perhaps even before that, Nice have always they beat Monaco 4-0, I think, in the beginning of last season. So they have had Monaco's number before. I think the return leg they lost 3-0. Falcao scored a couple of goals in that game, but they have competed and quite significantly beaten Monaco in the recent past. So it's not overly unusual that perhaps they would have Monaco's number in their current guise. And I still think perhaps, given that we were hopeful for Monaco at the beginning of the season, that they kept a few players, they looked like they signed well, that they were going to be not the team of last year, but they were going to be able to compete at least, or at least keep pace with PSG. But I think it may be time to sort of wise up to the fact that they're not the Monaco of last year, and they're not the team that was so fantastic in winning the title last year, and they've really had the core ripped out of them with Bakayoko and Silva and Mbappe going, they're half the team they are. And when Falcao and Fabinho aren't on form, obviously, and Lamar, obviously they're still fantastic players, but they can't. They haven't got. There's no one to take up the slack, and they do significantly drop off when they're not playing at their best. And I just think that we're expecting a little bit too much of Monaco these days. Given when you look at their squad, I honestly don't think there's much between them and Lyon and Marseille at the moment. And fourth in the league, they might be the fourth best team in the league at the moment. So that might not be too wrong, as it were. And the signings that have come in, they haven't lived up to expectations. If you look at Keita, I mean, he's done okay, but he's not been the powerful presence, pace, and exciting player that we thought he would be. Jovetic has barely got going at all. Marcus Lopez, Ronnie Lopez has come in and done okay. Obviously, he's a low knee return, but he can't fill the gap of Bernardo Silva. So, and Tielemans has been injured a lot of times, so they've been unfortunate there. But they're just not the team that they were, and they've been unlucky in that their signings haven't entirely come off yet. So maybe we're expecting a little bit too much of them. And Nice are a team on the up and one that the top four should keep an eye on, I think.
Absolutely. I think that it's also a factor of Monaco maybe not adapting to those losses. They're maybe trying too hard to stay to that 4-4-2 that worked so well last season. But like you mentioned, Keita Balde, Ronnie Lopez, they don't really fit in. And in all honesty, that in that midweek game, they were without Fabinho, and it really, really showed. That middle of the park is absolutely nothing. I no shame on Ndoram, who's still a young player and learning, but they looked pretty ghastly, really, in the middle at least. And I wanted to touch on one last team for this midweek round, and that's Toulouse, who have slipped into the drop zone over the last couple of weeks. They've not been in superb form. They managed to help Saint-Etienne break their streak at the weekend and lose 2-0, and they needed saving in the very, very last minute with a penalty for Gradel against Nantes. Sam, we were worried for Toulouse a while ago, and they looked to have tested it for a bit, but again, now with a lot of teams below them like Lille, I'm thinking Angers as well picking up recently as well. Especially with Metz coming up in the background as well, and we'll talk about them in a moment. Is there real fears that Les Violets are really sucking themselves into a dangerous relegation fight now?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they're not 19th for no reason. They're 19th because they've been consistently poor and consistently unlucky. You can be bad and lucky, or good and maybe not so lucky, but you can't be both bad and unlucky, and that's what they've been. They've had chances to win games and failed to put them away, and then they've just had some bizarre goals go against them. And last night against Nantes, arguably they got a little bit lucky. The penalty was a sort of brain explosion from Tatarusanu, just sort of diving in the 95th, 96th minute to give away a kind of brainless penalty, and that's an extra point. But admittedly they're only 2 points from safety, but you just don't know where the goals are going to come from. And when luck goes against you, like it seems to consistently go against this Toulouse side right now, you really have to worry about them. They've been bad for a year, and we shouldn't be surprised that they're now in the relegation zone.
Yeah, and they're just really struggling on both sides of the ball this season. I mean, we talked about them being a really interesting defence, and they've sort of a little bit better than some of the teams that have conceded loads. I'm thinking Dijon, but the caveat is they conceded 8 last night, so that really helps sink someone's goal difference. They are better than some of the teams around them there, but 19 goals really, and a lack of creative threat. I mean, they had Dermaz back last night, and they've obviously brought in Gradel over the summer, and he's only really slowly coming into form. But what do you think to this team at the moment, Adam? I mean, we've talked about them numerous times over the course of the first half of the season, and there's so much young talent, especially in that defence. You think they should have enough going forward as well, but it's never really quite clicked. Are you starting to worry for Dupraz's job now?
Yeah, definitely. As regular listeners to the pod will know, I'm a big fan of Toulouse and Dupraz in particular. But I kind of feel that, yes, his job is 100% under threat. Given they're like Bordeaux in some regards. You look at their team, and their expectations were top half this year, and justifiably so. But they're second bottom, and I think Dupraz is sometimes a bit too stubborn, and it can be a really good thing. His sort of fiery, personality is great, but it can be his downfall too. And there are certain situations where you kind of feel that he lets his sort of stubbornness get the better of him. And like Durmaz has been injured, but I would be not building team around him, but I would be prioritizing Jimmy Durmaz's place in the side. Obviously, it's very difficult when he's injured, but he kind of feels like he's been a little bit on the fringes. Like the last 3 games, he's come off the bench until before last night. And I think that they really lack creativity. And Durmaz is the man for me, looking at this team that can provide it. And Sam made a really good point about them being a bit unlucky, and that's definitely true. Like in a similar way to Monaco, and their signings haven't really come off either. Like, you look at Mbula, who got booed last night as he was substituted. You really do feel like that what they're trying hasn't come off, and I do fear for them. I've made this point a number of times, but they did not replace Oscar Trejo, who was brilliant since Dupraz took over as an attacking midfielder. The only creative player they really had, although I quite like Jan Bodiger, but he never gets a game for some reason. They're all their midfield is sort of workmanlike, ball carriers, hard-working players, but no flair and no vision. And then their strikers are all sort of quick wingers, or Ola Toivonen or Andy Delors, who are sort of very sort of static centre forwards. So they just lack flair and creativity to create the goal. It's not like Delors missing loads of chances; he's just not getting any. So although Guedo's come in and done well, I actually think he's been pretty good. It feels like he's trying to do it all on his own. And yeah, they just look they don't look in disarray, but they're not far off. And it is a real shame given what a great character Dupraz is and what a great team they could be. Like, you look at some of their players and you think in this league they should be top half. But I don't want to say they should get rid of Dupraz, but if it keeps going like this, they may have very little choice. But then who do you bring in? It's very difficult to say that they should bring in this guy or this guy. It would be a huge risk getting rid of him, but he's definitely in trouble.
It's a strange one, isn't it? That's always the problem of being that far in the bottom is that changing your manager is always a risk. It can go either way, but sometimes it just takes time. I mean, it always felt like, and Dupraz feels like there's a lot. It feels like it's always going to explode rather than anything else, really. In his case, in fact, let's talk about some of the games that are happening this weekend then, and starting with a really interesting one, really, on Saturday in Monaco versus Metz, because I want to start with that away team first, because Metz are on an excellent little bit of form. 3 wins out of 5, an excellent 3-0 win against Saint-Etienne, which sounds a lot better than it about 6 months ago than it would have done. Probably does now. But Nolan Roos scoring goals of anything, Sam. It's all flipping around. I mean, we mentioned they needed a goal scorer. Have they got one?
Well, I mean, yeah, they're scoring goals. They had nothing for months, and it was just difficult to watch and just not a lot of fun. And all of a sudden, Nolan Roos got some goals. This is what we wanted. We wanted Metz to find something, and now he's got 7 goals this season. He's scoring regularly. He scored against Saint-Etienne, against Dijon, against Strasbourg. All of a sudden you think, well, is there a miracle? Is it on? And can he be the guy to spearhead it? Optimism is growing.
It's just crazy to think, Adam. I mean, they were dead and buried for a long time of the season, but now they're only 4. I know it seems like a bit of a gap, but they're 7 points away from safety, 5 points off of Toulouse now. So at least they're catching up with someone. But 7 goals now this season for Roux. They played really well against Saint-Etienne, although again that's maybe saying a lot for Saint-Etienne as much as it is for Metz. But they're starting to play football. They're working under Frédéric Hans, who we thought was a good appointment as well. Could they? With Monaco not playing particularly great at the moment, can they keep the train going?
I think it's possible. I can see them getting a draw, given how they're playing, and given their sort of momentum that they're gathering. I can absolutely see it. But when I think back to that pod you and I did between us, Nathan, before Christmas, and we said Metz are down, like we wrote them off, and they had 5 points at that point, and then the last 3 games of the year they won 2 and drew 1, and suddenly you were thinking, hello. There could be something here, and as you said, they've had a brilliant run of form. And this Nolan Roux situation is ridiculous. I when they signed him, I was at a loss as to why, because he's of any striker I've ever seen, he has the least composure. He almost looks happier playing on the wing because he doesn't have to take the responsibility of scoring goals, and it's almost become a little bit of a running joke in Ligue about his sort of wayward finishing. And you look at his goal record. And his last double figure league total, if you like, was in 2010 for Stade Brest. He got 15. But since then, his league run he's got 6, 4, 5, 8, 9, 9, 9, 4, and he's got 7 this season. So he could get double figures for the first time in his career in Ligue 1, because that Stade Brest was in Ligue 2. So it's remarkable, really, that he's scoring goals. And whether it can last is another question. He's got the rest of the season to get 3 goals, and I wouldn't put much money on that at all, to be honest. But at the moment, it's working. And Pedro Hansen's a good manager. He said before, it's a nice appointment, and we were in favour of that, and it seems to be finally working. And you look across the team as well. George Mandžek back from Sparta Prague is a good return, good signing for 6 months. Milicevic, who's coming from Belgium again, looks like a good player. Mathieu Desevi's been brilliant this season, as has Renaud Coad. Both of them are very, very good players. And I've been really impressed with the 21-year-old centre-back Moussa Niakite, who they signed from Ligue 2. He started sort of the last 25 games and played pretty much 90 minutes in all of them. And he's been really, really solid, really athletic. Looks like he reads the game really well. And I think he's been a big part of their resurgence, prioritising him as their sort of first choice centre-back. And perhaps without Milan Bisevac, who was pretty terrible, he's been injured. Niakite's been, by comparison, really stable. So they look like a good team at the moment. It's come out of nowhere. And if Rooke keeps scoring goals, they've got a chance.
Yeah, and that's all they needed. They just needed a chance, it felt like. And I think in this one as well, especially, it's not just about keeping that ball rolling. It's not getting one of those 5-0, 6-0 hidings that you can sometimes get against those big teams. So let's start with some predictions then. Sam, what do you think in this one?
I think Metz's bubble will be a little bit burst, and I'm going to say Monaco 3-1.
Adam?
Yeah, I agree, but I think Metz have put in a performance, so 2-1 Monaco.
I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. Go on, Metz. Let's make things exciting, because I mean, you're looking at the bottom of the table. I mean, from if they can catch up with the rest of them as others are dropping points, that it could be really, really crazy. Because I mean, Guingamp are on 29 and Toulouse are on 20, and they are separated by 12 places, which is crazy. It might become an absolute dogfight. Another interesting game that's coming up, and as you mentioned earlier, Adam, Nice are a team that's slowly growing against a Saint-Etienne side that attested a route for one game at least, but sank perfectly back into their norm at the moment. They've got a new quote-unquote manager, obviously, because of issues with badges and such. It is oh, excuse me, sorry, I'm losing the pace there. It's Jean-Louis Gasset, I'm afraid, is obviously the permanent manager now, because of issues with badges with the previous man. So he's in charge. It got off to a decent start, at least against Toulouse at the weekend, although again, caveats as Toulouse at the moment. But 3-0 loss to Metz, even though they are on a little bit of a bounce, that's a bit of a hammer blow when you're having to go away again after that to a team like Nice on the rise.
Yeah, it really is. It really is. I was watching the Toulouse Nantes game yesterday, and I was sort of watching the scores come in, and to see Metz 2-0 up inside the first half, it's a shambles at Saint-Etienne. It really is. So you mentioned Julien Sable's lack of qualifications, and the club were being fined for having him as their manager. So Jean-Louis Gasset kind of took over almost as default, and they're basically managerless, because Gasset is a very experienced coach, but he's an assistant manager. He's not really, he's very old. He's getting on a little bit, maybe a bit harsh, but it might be true. He's not really the main man anymore, and he might be a very useful lieutenant, but the club lack a leader, and I don't think Gasset or Sable were going to be that man. So I think they need an appointment as a long-term manager as soon as possible. Is the first job for them. Secondly, the side has for a long time needed reworking. Obviously, players have come in, and they're not the most well-off of clubs. They've competed almost above their financial sort of weight in the last sort of 5 years under Gautier, and that's something that they will admit themselves. But that sort of workmanlike team that Gautier got so many good performances out of, has sort of disintegrated this year, and perhaps unsurprisingly that someone couldn't get the same high levels out of that team that Gautier did. Jan Anvier's come in, and that looks like a sensible signing, but again didn't get off to the best of starts last night. Only lasted an hour. Paul Johnson-Tep, you think would be a really, really good signing given his history in the league with Rennes and how fantastic he was for them. Been up and down at Wolfsburg, but for them he could be really crucial. But it just feels like there's this black hole that's sucking their confidence and their sort of momentum over the course of the season. It's just gone from bad to worse since that. Even before the game where they lost 5-0 and then Garcia resigned, and it just feels like that to get back on track, something huge is going to have to happen, or they need a real personality, a real leader as manager, because they could genuinely get relegated, and that would be a huge shame for the league because they're such a huge club and they're such an interesting team to cover and to follow. But it's possible, and they kind of need to do something about it sooner rather than later. Or this slide is going to continue, and I fear for them. So I think they need a manager as soon as possible, and they need to keep remoulding this team. A couple of good signings. Neven Subotic has been mentioned quite a lot. That would be great. Be a good partner for Loic Perrin. But it needs to happen sooner rather than later.
Yeah, they need to get extra bits in, but Adam mentioned him there, really, Sam, and we've mentioned the real creative lack that Saint-Etienne have had for not just this season, but possibly a few years. But is someone like Paul Johnson-Tep, who is on loan at the club for the rest of the season at least, is he the kind of player that they need? Is he someone who can hopefully spark this the Ligue side that has been so dormant so far this season?
He'll have to be. I mean, they're in real trouble, and they're lucky that so many other teams are. But he's had a nice run with Wolfsburg. Not spectacular, but at least he looked decent. And obviously, previously with Rennes, that was where he really showed some quality. But he's going to need to be really special for Saint-Etienne, because I think the key word Adam used there was personality or lack thereof. This team just has nothing. It's just there's nothing going on. There's no personality. There's no identity. At least with Christophe Galtier, I think we all thought, well, a little bit too much personality. But with him leaving in the summer, and now there's just nothing there. There's a void. And Paul Johnson-Tep, I saw a lot of people making the jokes last night on Twitter that as Saint-Etienne were losing again, perhaps he might try and pull out of the deal to join. But he's here now, and he's going to have to be the identity of this team, because without him, they just don't have much.
No pressure then. Let's talk about our predictions then, and I'll start with you, Adam. What do you think in this one?
I'm going to go 4-0 Nice.
Sam?
That's a pretty good sounding scoreline, but just to be different, I'll say 3-0 Nice.
Yeah, it feels like it might be a bit of a hammering, especially the way Balotelli's playing. The lift that having Willan Cyprien back in the side, which is fantastic news, it is seemingly giving them Seri back in form as well. They may be starting to build a bit of momentum. This could be a hammering. I think it might be 5-0, to be fair. It's a real worrying time for Saint-Etienne. To rest everything on Paul Johnson-Tep, let's hope he can maybe pull them out of the mire after this one. So we finish with the big match of the weekend, and it's an absolutely huge one. Lyon PSG. How else would you like to finish your weekend, really? That's going to be a terrific match, really. Sam, focusing on the hosts, first of all, because obviously Lyon will be playing at home. It'd be a great opportunity for them to maybe put some spokes in the gears, at least, of Paris Saint-Germain at the moment. They were a bit average at the weekend. They maybe sort of snuck. Well, they should have maybe got better against Angers, really. It's twice that they've struggled against them, but they got a really solid win against Guingamp that could have been 3 or 4 on another day. They're expecting Mariano Diaz to come back as well for this one. Are they gearing up for one big shot at the King?
Yeah, I think this game comes at a nice time for them. Nabil Fekir, I think you mentioned earlier, he's got 15 goals now this season, and I think it's 5 games in a row that he's scored. He looks excellent. Aouar scored again midweek. He's matched Benzema's record through his first 26 games for the club, which is pretty impressive considering he's not even a forward. Lyon, yes, Diaz as well. He was on the bench last night. This is a great time for them to have a chance to knock off PSG. I mean, when they played earlier in the season, Lyon were quietly impressive. Not great, but it was a great performance from Ndombele. Among others, and on another day, perhaps with a little more fortune from the referee, Lyon could have won that game. They ended up losing it 2-0, 2 own goals, bit of a strange one. But certainly, yeah, Lyon could have won that one, and they've proven, I think, that they are the second best team in France. If anyone's going to knock off the king and actually beat them, not just kind of get lucky, Lyon are the team to do it, and this is the game in which it'll happen.
Yeah, and that's the thing about this one, isn't it, Adam? That you think it's maybe the ideal time with Lyon playing reasonably well, but Paris Saint-Germain have probably come off their best performance of the season with a half-fit Neymar and Mbappe rested on the bench. That would have struck the fear of God in me, but I'm wondering about this Lyon team, whether they can rise to this occasion.
Yeah, I think they will. I think they've put in. There's been some fantastic games. You're absolutely right, Nathan. That there's been some. It will be a really good game. And Lyon at home to PSG have been really competitive with them over the last couple of years. They lost last year, I seem to remember, but it was a really good game. And I seem to remember the year that PSG won the title by 30 odd points the year before. They did beat them at home, so at Lyon. So these are very competitive games, and yeah, if I despite PSG's form, they've got arguably bigger games to come. Obviously, Champions League, they're going to be seeing those as bigger games, but as far as it goes domestically at the moment, Lyon are probably the biggest test they'll have, and this is arguably the toughest game they've got left remaining in the league, having already played, having had the Classique at Marseille. So I think they won't be nervous about it or concerned, but Lyon, they'll be taking Lyon very seriously, and when you look at their team, it looks great. It's one of those teams when you see it written down and you see the graphics at the beginning of the game and they come up and it looks like a really, really strong 11, and that won't be lost on PSG. So this will be a really exciting game, really competitive, and Lyon could quite easily get something, if not win this game. So big test for PSG, and it's the kind of game that PSG need to prove themselves in, because it's fine beating Dijon 8-0 at home. They were brilliant and that's great, but they are magnitude better than Dijon, and the games where they've really slipped up this year have been pressure games when they've run away to a team, perhaps in the league, like at Strasbourg, where there's been a crowd on top of them and they've been put under pressure and they lost that game. Where they went to Bayern Munich and they were a little bit complacent, perhaps, but Jupp Heynckes, different kettle of fish than Ancelotti's Bayern Munich, and they were pretty poor in that game and lost. And this is the type of game they need to prioritize if they're going to make an effect on the Champions League, because it's practice, if you like, for those bigger games when they go to Real Madrid, and if they get past them, the later ties. So I would like to see Emery really prioritize this game and treat it like the big game that it is, and prove that they can, in these big pressurized games, or when they're put under any sort of pressure, play as well as did against Dijon, because that is the PSG that will win the Champions League, not the one that went to Strasbourg or the one that went to Bayern Munich.
That's what really makes this one interesting, really. It feels like still with Marseille already having played at home against them, and Monaco really in an indifferent sort of form, and again they've played at home against them. This feels like Paris Saint-Germain's final big hurdle, really, against a big team, at least anyway, for this season, and a big marker with those Champions League still coming up in sort of February, Valentine's Day time. They've still got a lot of time to really focus on the league and take this kind of game. It's going to be a really, really good one. I think I implore everyone to take watch of this one, because I do remember
great atmosphere as well. It'll be,
yeah, and it was a fantastic game. The reverse one as well, where it obviously finished with 2 own goals, a bit strangely, but Lyon was superb that night, and I just have that feeling they might be able to pull it off again. Sam, what's your prediction?
I really believe in this Lyon team, and I think they're going to pull it off. I think they're going to win 2-1.
Adam?
2-2, I think.
I'm going to go for 3-3. I think it's going to be a really terrific game. With Mbappe back, I do fear that PSG might nick it, having him fresh as well, but I think it might be a really, really excellent one, to be fair. That's all for this week. My thanks to Sam, Adam, and everyone listening at home. Join us for the main show on Monday, but for now, enjoy your weekend of football.